Chapter 1. The Ceremony. The System Selection Hall in downtown Meridian City held 11,000 18-year-olds on the morning my life ended for the first time, though I would not understand that fact until it happened to me twice. I stood in line beside my younger brother, Zayn, both of us dressed in the plain white ceremonial robes the city provided for free, watching wealthier families arrive in tailored versions of the same garment as if fabric quality could influence which system the floating obelisk at the center of the hall would offer you. Couldn't. Everyone who had ever studied the phenomenon agreed on that much, even if no one agreed on anything else about how the systems chose what to offer. Two choices, Zayn muttered beside me, practicing the way he always did when he was nervous, running through information he already knew perfectly well. Everyone gets exactly two options, presented at random, and once you choose, that's it forever. No trading. No changing your mind next week. I know how it works, Zayn. I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it for me. He exhaled, shoulders tight. What if I get something useless? What if you get something incredible and I get something like, I don't know, the ability to always find parking? I almost laughed. In my first life, at exactly this moment, I had laughed, warm and easy, the laugh of an older brother who genuinely believed nothing bad could touch either of us as long as we stayed close. This time I only smiled, faintly, and said nothing, because I already knew what was coming. I had lived this exact morning before, 15 years in the future, in a version of events that no longer technically existed anywhere except inside my own memory. I knew that in roughly 4 minutes, the obelisk would present me with two choices. The genius system, glowing gold, promising accelerated learning, perfect recall, and enhanced problem solving. And beside it, dimmer, unremarkable, easy to dismiss, the cashback system. I knew that in my first life, I had reached for the gold light without hesitation, and that my brother, standing exactly where he stood now, had received the exact same two choices in a private booth 30 feet away. A detail nobody in the crowd would ever learn, because system offers were sealed and private, shown only to the person receiving them. Zayn had chosen the cashback system that day, not out of humility, simply because it was what the obelisk had offered him, and there had been no gold light in his booth to tempt him away from it. I remembered every year that followed. The company I built from a garage into the largest halal technology conglomerate on the planet. The AI research division. The robotics manufacturing lines that employed 400,000 people across 6 continents. The renewable energy grid that had lifted entire regions out of energy poverty. 15 years of work, built one honest decision at a time. I remembered Zayn's quiet resentment growing underneath all of it like rot behind drywall, invisible until the whole structure came down at once. I remembered the leaked research, the sabotaged supplier contracts, the false rumors fed to investors at precisely the moments they would do the most damage. I remembered the final board meeting, watching people I had trusted for a decade vote to dissolve the company I had built with my own hands, not understanding until 18 months later, far too late to matter, that my own brother had orchestrated the entire collapse from the inside patiently over years because he could not stand watching me succeed with what he believed was the objectively worst system. I remembered falling asleep in an empty apartment that no longer had furniture in it, because the furniture had been repossessed along with everything else, and thinking, with the particular exhausted clarity of a man who has lost absolutely everything, that I would give anything for one more chance to do it differently. I had not expected the universe to actually offer me one. "Hale, Adam." A voice called from the front of the hall. I walked forward into booth 14, and the obelisk's light unfurled in front of me exactly as I remembered it would. Gold on the left, promising genius. Dim and unglamorous on the right, promising nothing more exciting than double returns on legitimate business spending. I reached out, without hesitation, and touched the dim light. Behind me, in the crowd that could not see my choice, someone actually laughed. The same careless, half-cruel laugh that had followed me out of the hall 15 years ago, when word eventually spread that I had settled for the weakest system on record while my brother received genuine brilliance. I let the laugh pass over me without reaction, because I already knew, with a certainty no one else in that hall could possibly share, exactly how funny that laugh would look in a decade and a half. Zayn was waiting for me outside the hall, practically vibrating with excitement, describing in rapid detail the golden light and the flood of instant comprehension that had already reorganized itself inside his skull the moment he accepted the genius system. I can already tell it's incredible, Adam. I understood the entire tax code the obelisk attendant was explaining to the family next to us. Just understood it. Instantly. He paused, finally registering my calm expression. What did you get? Cashback system, I said simply. Zayn blinked, then carefully tried to arrange his face into something diplomatic. That's a real system. People have built things with worse. I know. You don't seem upset. I'm not, I said, and meant it more completely than my brother could possibly understand. I think it's going to work out fine. Chapter 2. The First Dollar. The cashback system's interface, when I finally examined it alone in my room that night, was almost insultingly plain compared to what I remembered Zayn's genius panel looking like in the old timeline. Clean lines, a simple ledger format, no dramatic light shows, no encouraging pop-up messages celebrating my choice. Cashback system. Active. Tier 2X. Total verified business investment. $0. Total cashback earned. $0. Beneath the numbers sat a short, formally worded explanation I already had memorized from a previous life spent studying every publicly available detail about my brother's original system, back when I'd still believed his success had been earned honestly. Asterisk, this system returns double the value of legitimate business expenditures personally made by the account holder. Eligible categories include manufacturing, engineering, research, logistics, equipment, construction, verified employee compensation, charitable donation, education, and healthcare infrastructure. The system does not recognize gambling, interest-based transactions, fraudulent activity, money laundering, personal luxury spending, or any expenditure lacking genuine productive purpose. Asterisk. I had 18 years of memory telling me exactly how powerful this quiet, unglamorous ledger could become if handled correctly, and exactly how catastrophically it could be squandered if handled the way my brother originally had. Spending lavishly on lifestyle upgrades disguised loosely as business expenses, triggering the system's fraud detection just often enough to slow growth, wasting years learning lessons I already knew by heart. I was not going to make those mistakes. I was not going to make any of the mistakes. My first act was almost absurdly small. I had $11 saved from birthday money, and I spent every cent of it on a second-hand soldering iron and a small spool of wire from the hardware store 3 blocks from my family's apartment. Listed clearly as equipment for a hobby electronics repair business I registered, that same week, as a sole proprietorship under my own name. The system chimed quietly in my vision the moment the purchase cleared. Eligible expenditure detected. Equipment, electronics repair. Amount, $11.00. ***. Cashback issued, $22.00. $11 had become $22. It was nothing. It would not have impressed anyone watching, and no one was watching, which was exactly how I wanted it in these early months. In my first life, wealth had arrived loudly and drawn attention long before I had the wisdom to handle that attention well. This time, I intended to build in silence for as long as silence remained useful. I spent the $22 on more parts. Received $44. Reinvested that into a proper multimeter and a small batch of broken phones I bought cheap from a local classified site, repaired using skills I still perfectly remembered from a life spent building far more advanced technology than cracked phone screens. I resold the repaired phones for a modest profit on top of the doubled equipment cost, and the system, satisfied that actual value was being created through actual productive labor, kept doubling every legitimate dollar I fed back into the business. Within 3 months, my single-person phone repair operation had become $400 of working capital. Within 6 months, it was enough to rent a small storefront and hire my first employee, a laid-off electronics technician named Marcus Webb, 61 years old, sharp-eyed and quietly grateful for work in an industry that had increasingly written off anyone over 50. Paying Marcus his first month's wages in full on time triggered the largest single cashback event of my young life so far. Eligible expenditure detected. Verified employee compensation. Amount, $3, $200.00. Cashback issued, $6, $400.00. I sat alone in the back office of my small shop that evening, staring at the number, and felt something settle into place that had nothing to do with money at all. I remembered, with painful clarity, the exact moment 18 years from now when I would learn my own brother had been quietly destroying the company built on top of numbers exactly like this one. I remembered how much of that destruction had been possible specifically because I, in my first life, had grown the company too fast, too publicly, trusting too many people too quickly, never building the kind of quiet internal foundation that could withstand a betrayal from someone inside my own family. This time would be different. Not because the system was different, because I was. Chapter 3. The Brothers' Ascent. Across town, in a gleaming new co-working space our parents had proudly helped him lease, Zayn was already becoming something of a minor local legend. The genius system had made him, without exaggeration, one of the sharpest minds in Meridian City within his very first year of access. He absorbed advanced mathematics, engineering principles, and business strategy with a speed that left his university professors quietly unsettled, several of them privately suggesting he skip directly to graduate-level coursework. He built his first successful venture, a logistics optimization software platform, almost entirely alone, coding functional prototypes in weeks that would have taken conventional teams the better part of a year. He was, by every visible measure, exactly the prodigy the Golden Light had promised he would become. He was also, quietly, watching my slow, unglamorous progress with an attention that had nothing healthy in it at all. "A phone repair shop," Zayn said one evening at our parents' dinner table, not quite managing to keep the condescension out of his voice. "That's good for you, Adam. Genuinely. It's very stable." "It's a start," I said mildly, passing the rice. "I mean, my platform just closed a contract with 3 regional shipping companies. We're processing $400,000 in logistics volume a month." He said the number with the particular carelessness of someone who wanted it to land as impressive without appearing to try. "But phone repair is great too." "Really?" I remembered this exact conversation from my first life, word for word, down to the slight edge in his voice. I remembered how, at 18, it had genuinely stung, the casual dismissal, the faint performance of generosity that barely concealed real condescension underneath. I remembered spending years afterward, even as my own company grew far larger than anything Zayn ever built independently, still carrying some small unresolved wound from dinners exactly like this one. This time, I simply smiled and meant it, because I understood something now that 18-year-old me in the first timeline never had. Zayn's need to diminish me wasn't really about my shop at all. It had never been about the shop. "Sounds like the platform's doing well," I said, and changed the subject to something easier, and watched, with quiet interest rather than hurt, the small flicker of frustration that crossed my brother's face at not getting the reaction he'd clearly been fishing for. Our mother, oblivious to the current running beneath the surface of the conversation, beamed at both of us with the particular pride of a woman who genuinely believed she had raised 2 remarkable sons who would always look out for each other. I caught my father's eye across the table, a quieter, more perceptive man than his wife, who said very little but noticed everything, and saw, just for a moment, something that might have been concern. I filed the observation away carefully, the way I filed away every piece of information now, because in my first life I had learned, at unbearable cost, that the people who eventually destroyed you rarely announced themselves as enemies. They sat across from you at dinner tables, passing rice, calling your struggling small business stable, in a tone that made the words sound like an insult. For years, long before the sabotage ever truly began, I intended to make sure it never got that far this time. Chapter 4: Foundations. By the end of my second year, my repair shop had grown into something that no longer resembled a repair shop at all. The cashback system's doubling effect, applied with total discipline to nothing but genuine productive reinvestment, had compounded in exactly the way I had spent 18 years of a previous life coming to understand mathematically, even if I had never personally experienced it from the inside. Every dollar spent on real equipment, real wages, real training, real research came back doubled, and every double dollar reinvested again into more equipment, more wages, more capability doubled again. It was, I now understood with total clarity, one of the purest compounding engines that had ever existed, deliberately, carefully limited to reward only genuine value creation, which meant it could never be gamed, never be rushed, never be shortcut. It rewarded exactly the kind of patient, disciplined building that I, uniquely among nearly everyone my age, actually possessed the hard-won wisdom to execute correctly on the very first attempt. I expanded from phone repair into small-scale electronics manufacturing, building simple circuit boards for local hobbyists and educational markets. I hired 6 more employees, all careful, deliberate hires, all people like Marcus, skilled, undervalued, grateful for real opportunity. I paid market wages without hesitation, understanding now, in a way my first life self never had, that every dollar paid to a genuinely valuable employee was not a cost but a doubled investment in the company's own foundation. I registered formal patents on 2 small circuit efficiency improvements I remembered clearly from technology that, in my first life, wouldn't be publicly developed for another 6 years. Careful, deliberately incremental innovations, nothing so advanced it would draw unwanted attention. Nothing that couldn't be plausibly explained as the work of a talented, hard-working young engineer rather than a man who had already lived through the future once. By my 20th birthday, Hale Circuit Solutions employed 23 people and had, for the first time, crossed 7 figures in annual revenue. I did not celebrate loudly. I gave every employee a modest bonus, reinvested the rest immediately into a small research and development fund, and spent the evening of my birthday exactly the way I'd spent most evenings for 2 years. Quietly reviewing engineering specifications at my kitchen table, thinking several moves ahead. My phone buzzed. A message from Zayn. *, heard you crossed $1 million in revenue. Congrats, genuinely. My platform did that in month 4 LOL. But seriously, proud of you. *, I read the message twice, noting with clinical interest the specific shape of my brother's need, the reflexive comparison buried inside every compliment. The inability to simply be happy for someone else's success without measuring it against his own. Thanks, Zayn, I typed back. How's the platform doing these days? The reply took 11 minutes, unusually long for my brother, who typically responded within seconds. * actually could use some advice sometime. Nothing urgent. Things are good. *. I set the phone down and sat with that message for a long time. In my first life, I remembered, this had been roughly the point where Zayn's platform, despite its brilliant technical foundation, had begun struggling. Not from any flaw in the genius system itself, but from the much more mundane, much more human problem of a 20-year-old prodigy trying to run an entire company almost entirely alone, unwilling to delegate, unwilling to admit weakness, convinced that raw intelligence alone could substitute for the years of hard-won operational experience. That I, even in my first life, had only slowly developed through genuine trial and error. Nothing urgent almost certainly meant something was, in fact, urgent. I thought carefully about what to say next because this was exactly the kind of moment my 18 years of hindsight had prepared me for most precisely. Not the big, dramatic confrontations that would come later, but small, quiet moments like this one, where the entire future course of my relationship with my brother could still, possibly, bend towards something other than betrayal. Always happy to talk, I typed. * dinner this week? Just us, no parents. *. The reply came back almost instantly this time. * Yeah, that'd be good. *. I looked at those 5 words for a long moment, remembering a version of my brother who, in another life, had spent years secretly working to destroy everything I built, and allowed myself, cautiously, to wonder whether this time, that ending was not actually inevitable at all. I did not yet know how wrong that hope would eventually prove to be. But for now, sitting alone at my kitchen table on the night of my 20th birthday, circuit diagrams spread out in front of me and a small, genuine company finally beginning to take real shape around me, I allowed myself, for the first time since waking up 18 years old again, to simply feel something like hope. Chapter 5. What Zayn Didn't Say. The restaurant Zayn chose for our dinner was expensive in the specific way that mattered to people who wanted to be seen being successful. Not extravagant exactly, but pointed, the kind of place where the prices weren't printed on the menu because everyone dining there was supposed to already know they didn't need to check. I arrived first and chose a table near the back, away from the windows, out of long habit from a previous life spent learning that visibility invited exactly the kind of attention that made honest business harder, not easier. Zayn arrived 12 minutes late, apologizing distractedly, already scanning the room in a way that suggested he was checking who might have noticed his arrival rather than actually looking for me. "So," I said, once the initial small talk had run its course, "what's going on with the platform?" Zayn's easy, practiced confidence faltered just slightly at the direct question. It's not. It's not a crisis. I want to be clear about that. The technology is solid. The technology has always been solid. But I underestimated how much of running a company isn't the technology. He turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth, not quite meeting my eyes. I've been doing everything myself. Coding, sales calls, investor relations, hiring, contracts. I thought I could just think faster than the problems could pile up. That's how it's always worked before. I recognized the shape of this confession with painful, precise clarity, because I had heard some version of it before, far too late, in a boardroom 18 years in a future that no longer existed, delivered not as a vulnerable admission over dinner but as a hollow excuse offered after the damage was already irreversible. What's actually happening, Zayn? Specifically. He exhaled, and for just a moment, something genuine surfaced beneath the careful performance he usually maintained even around family. I lost 2 of the shipping contracts. The client said service reliability had slipped, which, fine, maybe it had. I've been stretched too thin to manage support properly. But I also think a competitor undercut me on pricing in a way that only made sense if they somehow knew my exact rate structure in advance, which they shouldn't have been able to know. You think someone leaked your pricing? I don't know. Maybe I'm being paranoid. He shook his head, frustrated with himself. I just don't understand how a rival company priced their bid 4% below my actual cost basis. That's not a lucky guess. That's someone who saw my numbers. I sat with this information carefully, turning it over from several directions at once. In my first life, this exact platform at exactly this stage had also lost contracts to unexplained undercutting. A detail I had never known at the time because at 20 years old in my original timeline I had been entirely consumed by my own company's rapid early growth, paying almost no attention to my brother's parallel struggles. It was entirely possible this was simply ordinary competitive business friction, the kind every young company eventually survived or didn't. It was also entirely possible this was the very first, smallest, earliest thread of the exact pattern that would, 18 years from now in the version of events I remembered, eventually consume my own company from the inside. I did not yet know which explanation was true. I filed the question away carefully, the way I filed away everything now, and chose my next words with real deliberation. Do you want help? I asked. Not money. Actual operational help. I've been running a real company for 2 years now. I've made every beginner mistake there is to make. I could save you a lot of time. Something crossed Zayn's face too quickly to fully name. Gratitude, and beneath it, almost immediately, something sharper and less comfortable. Pride, perhaps, or something closer to resentment at needing the offer at all. I appreciate that, he said carefully. Let me think about it. He did not, I noted, actually say yes. Chapter 6. The pattern begins. I did not push the offer further over the following weeks, understanding with hard-earned patience that my brother needed to arrive at acceptance in his own time, on his own terms, without feeling managed or condescended to. Instead, I focused on my own company's steady, disciplined growth, expanding Hale Circuit Solutions into a second facility, hiring a proper operations manager to handle the logistics work that had, until now, still run partly through my own exhausted late-night attention. The system's ledger, checked quietly every evening, had become a source of genuine satisfaction rather than the anxious obsession it might have easily become in less careful hands. Cashback System. Active. Tier 2X. Total verified business investment. $2,847,000. Total cashback earned. $5,694,000. Nearly $6 million, generated entirely from patient, legitimate reinvestment, with not a single flagged or rejected transaction across 2 full years of operation. I had built, quietly and without fanfare, one of the fastest-growing small manufacturing companies in the region, and almost no one outside my own small circle of employees and family understood how quickly it was actually accelerating, because I had deliberately avoided the kind of press attention that, in my first life, had arrived far too early and drawn far too much unwanted scrutiny. It was during this period of careful, quiet growth that the first genuinely strange incident occurred. A routine quality audit at my second facility flagged a batch of defective circuit boards. Nothing catastrophic, the kind of manufacturing variance that happened occasionally in any operation, easily traced to a faulty calibration on one production line. My operations manager, a sharp, careful person named Priya, who had joined the company 6 months earlier from a much larger manufacturer, brought me the findings personally rather than simply filing a routine report. "I don't think this was random," Priya said, spreading the calibration logs across my desk. "Look at the timing. The miscalibration happened exactly during the maintenance window, on exactly the shift where we had a temporary contractor covering for Deshawn's medical leave. And look here," Priya pointed to a secondary log. "Someone accessed the calibration override settings from an account that shouldn't have had permission to touch them at all." I studied the logs carefully, feeling something cold and familiar settle into my chest. Not surprise exactly, because some quiet, watchful part of me had never fully believed that 18 years of hard-won hindsight could simply prevent every possible complication from ever arising again. But something closer to grim recognition. "Do we know who the temporary contractor was?" "Agency-sourced, name of Marcus Doyle. References checked out fine on paper." But Priya hesitated. "This might be nothing. Might genuinely just be a mistake by someone undertrained who accidentally accessed settings they shouldn't have. I don't want to jump to conspiracy theories over a bad batch of circuit boards." "You're right to flag it either way," I said carefully. "Pull his full background, quietly, and check whether he's worked at any of our direct competitors recently." Priya nodded and left to begin the research, and I sat alone at my desk for a long time afterward, thinking not about circuit boards at all, but about a shipping contract my brother had lost to an impossibly precise underbid, and a temporary contractor with unexplained system access, and the uncomfortable, still entirely unproven possibility connecting them. I was not ready, not yet, to seriously suspect my own brother of anything. The evidence was circumstantial at best, explainable by a dozen more mundane possibilities. But somewhere in the careful, patient calculations I had been running since the moment I opened my eyes 18 years old again, a new variable had just quietly entered the equation, and I had learned, at unbearable cost, never to dismiss a pattern simply because I did not yet want it to be true. Chapter 7. Priya's Report. The background check took 8 days. Priya delivered the results in person again, this time with a folder thick enough that I knew, before Priya said a single word, that whatever had been found was not nothing. "Marcus Doyle doesn't exist," Priya said, setting the folder down. "Not really. The social security number on his agency paperwork belongs to a man who died 4 years ago in a different state. The references on file both trace back to phone numbers that forward to the same answering service. Whoever staffed him through the temp agency either got played completely or was in on it." I felt the cold recognition from a week earlier sharpen into something more concrete. "Which agency?"
Bridgeline Staffing Solutions.
"Small operation. Does contract work for maybe a dozen companies in the manufacturing corridor." Priya paused. "I did some digging into their client list since you asked me to check competitors. Bridgeline's largest client, by contract volume, is a logistics software company called Vantable Systems." I went very still. "Vantable Systems. You know them?" I did. In my first life, Vantable Systems had not existed under that name at all, but I recognized the underlying pattern immediately because I had spent months in my previous timeline, far too late to matter, quietly researching exactly this kind of shell structure, after finally uncovering the truth about who had destroyed my own company. Zayn had never operated sabotage directly, not personally, not with his own hands leaving traceable fingerprints. He had built, layer by careful layer, a small constellation of shell companies and staffing intermediaries specifically designed to create exactly enough deniability that even a thorough investigation would struggle to connect the sabotage directly back to him. Vantable Systems was not, I now strongly suspected, a rival logistics company at all. It was very likely a shell, quite possibly funded, however indirectly, by my own brother, whose platform had suspiciously lost contracts to an impossibly precise underbid from a competitor at almost exactly the same moment a mysterious contractor had sabotaged my own production line. "I need you to find out everything you can about who actually owns and funds Vantable Systems," I said carefully. "Quietly. No direct contact, no confrontation. Nothing that tips anyone off that we're looking. Just information." Priya studied my face for a moment, clearly reading something in my controlled reaction that told Priya this was no longer purely a manufacturing quality issue.
Adam.
Is there something you're not telling me? I considered, for a long moment, exactly how much to say. Priya had proven sharp, careful, and fiercely loyal in the 6 months since joining the company. Precisely the kind of person I had learned, far too late in my first life, that I needed on my side long before any crisis actually arrived. But the full truth, a previous life, a brother who would eventually orchestrate my total ruin, a second chance most people would consider impossible to believe, was not something I could share with anyone, not yet, perhaps not ever. I have a suspicion, I said finally, choosing the truth as far as I could safely tell it. About someone I care about, and I need to know if it's actually true before I let myself believe it. Can you help me find out, without either of us jumping to conclusions before we have real evidence? Of course, Priya said without hesitation, and I felt, not for the first time, a genuine and complicated gratitude that some things, loyalty, competence, quiet trustworthiness, did not require 18 years of hindsight to recognize. Some people were simply, reliably good, and building a company worth protecting meant learning to find them early, and keep them close long before you needed them most. Chapter 8. The dinner he didn't cancel. I did not cancel my next dinner with Zayn. I considered it, seriously, for most of a difficult afternoon. The idea of sitting across from my brother while a quiet investigation into a possible shell company connected to him unfolded in the background felt, at first, dishonest in a way that sat uncomfortably against everything I valued about myself. But I reminded myself, deliberately, that I did not yet have proof of anything. Suspicion was not the same as certainty, and I had promised myself, waking up 18 years old again with the unbearable weight of foreknowledge, that I would not let paranoia curdle into the kind of preemptive cruelty that could become its own self-fulfilling betrayal. If I was wrong about Zayn, if this was all coincidence, competitive business friction, nothing more sinister than two young companies bumping against each other in a crowded market, then treating my brother as a suspect before he'd earned that suspicion would be its own kind of failure, the exact opposite of the patient, disciplined character I was trying carefully to rebuild my second life around. So I went to dinner and I asked about the platform and I listened. I took your advice, Zayn said, some genuine warmth in his voice for the first time in weeks. Hired an operations lead. Guy named Felix, came recommended through a staffing agency, actually. Bridgeline, might have heard of them, they work with a bunch of companies in the area. I kept my expression carefully neutral, filing the detail away with precision. How's it working out? Good, actually. Really good. He's sharp, knows logistics inside and out, already tightened up 2 processes that were bleeding money. Zayn smiled, and for a moment looked almost like the brother I remembered from childhood, before either system, before any of it. I think I was just trying to do too much alone. You were right about that. I'm glad it's helping. Lost another contract last week, though. His smile faded slightly. Different client this time, no obvious undercut. They just said they were going with a competitor's integrated package instead. Vantable Systems, if you've heard of them, they've been expanding aggressively in our space the last few months. I felt the cold certainty settle fully into place this time. No longer a suspicion but something close to confirmed pattern, even without Priya's research yet complete. My brother was losing contracts, one by one, to a shell company that had almost certainly been staffed through the exact same agency that had planted a false contractor inside my own manufacturing facility. And he was mentioning both facts, entirely unaware of the connection, with the open, unguarded innocence of someone who genuinely did not yet understand what was happening to either of us. Which meant, I realized with a complicated mixture of relief and dread, that in this timeline, at least so far, Zayn was very likely not the one orchestrating the sabotage at all. Someone else was working against both of us.